A group of black boys were just playing basketball when their evening turned into an unexpected arrest due to the actions of a racist officer. But no one expected the events that followed would change their lives and shake an entire town. So, what happened next? Subscribe to the channel and post in the comments where you're watching from. The sound of a bouncing basketball echoed through the cracked asphalt court as the sun began to dip below the horizon. This was their sanctuary, a worn-down basketball court surrounded by chain-link fences and shadowed by the looming concrete buildings of the neighborhood. Here, dreams were forged, and for a group of young boys, the game was more than just a pastime. It was their escape, their hope, and their path to something greater. Jamal, the oldest among them at 17, was the unofficial leader of the group. His wiry frame moved with a mixture of grace and urgency, the ball seemingly an extension of his hand as he dribbled down the court. His face was set in a determined expression, a look that belied the pressures he carried daily. At home, his mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and his younger siblings depended on him for guidance. Basketball was his ticket out, a way to secure a scholarship and give his family a better life. Tonight, like every other evening, he played as if scouts were watching, though none ever came to this part of the city. "Jamal, pass it," Tyler called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. Tyler, a year younger than Jamal, was the strategist of the group. His analytical mind saw opportunities others missed, and his precision made him an invaluable teammate. He caught the pass effortlessly and pivoted, dodging an imaginary defender before taking a shot. The ball soared through the air, spinning in a perfect arc before swishing through the rusted hoop. "Man, you're gonna break that rim one day," Jamal teased, a rare smile breaking across his face. Tyler laughed and glanced at his little brother, Malik, who was trying to dribble with both hands, the ball bouncing wildly out of control. At 12 years old, Malik was the youngest and least experienced of the group. His small frame and wide, eager eyes often made him the target of good-natured ribbing, but his determination was undeniable. "Come on, Malik," Tyler encouraged, stepping up to guide him. "Keep your eyes on the ball, not your feet. You've got this." Malik grinned sheepishly and tried again, this time managing a steady rhythm. His persistence drew a round of applause from the group, and he beamed with pride. For Malik, basketball was more than just a game. It was a way to feel closer to his older brother and to prove that he belonged. The other boys, Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus, were busy setting up plays and practicing their footwork. Each of them carried their own burdens: broken homes, tight budgets, and the constant presence of danger that came with growing up in their neighborhood. But on this court, they were a team. They weren't just kids from the projects, they were players, athletes with a shared dream of making it to the school league and proving that they were more than the labels society placed on them. As the evening deepened, the hum of the neighborhood became their background music. Distant car horns, laughter from nearby stoops, and the occasional shout from a passerby created a symphony of urban life. The court, however, was their world, separated by the chain-link fence that encased it. Beyond it lay the reality they sought to escape: the cramped apartments, the struggle to make ends meet, the systemic barriers that kept opportunities just out of reach. Jamal called for a break, and the boys collapsed onto the sidelines, guzzling water from mismatched bottles. The air was filled with the tang of sweat and the faint scent of rubber from their worn-out sneakers. Despite the fatigue, their spirits were high. They joked and debated about the best NBA players, each boy fiercely defending his favorite. For a moment, they could forget the challenges waiting for them beyond the court. Then, the sound of an engine disrupted their banter. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the dim light. The laughter died down as two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp and their expressions hard. The older officer, whose name badge read Lawrence, surveyed the group with thinly veiled disdain. His partner, Brady, hung back, his arms crossed and a smirk playing on his lips. "What's going on here?" Lawrence asked, his voice sharp. "This some kind of gang meeting?" The boys exchanged uneasy glances, the mood shifting from camaraderie to tension. Jamal stood, his posture calm but wary. "We're just playing ball, sir," he said evenly, gesturing to the court. "We're getting ready for the school league." Lawrence snorted. "School league, huh? And here I thought you'd be planning your next heist." The insult hung in the air, heavy and cutting. Tyler clenched his fists, but Jamal shot him a warning look. This wasn't the first time they'd encountered hostility, and they all knew how quickly these situations could escalate. Brady stepped forward, his tone mocking. "Nice court you've got here. Real professional. What's next, the NBA draft?" The boys stayed silent, their eyes darting between the officers. Malik shifted closer to Tyler, his small hands gripping the hem of his brother's shirt. The officer's presence loomed like a dark cloud over their safe haven, turning what had been a joyful evening into something ominous. Lawrence walked over to the ball lying near the sideline and picked it up. He examined it for a moment before bouncing it once, twice, then tossing it toward Malik. The ball hit the boy's chest harder than necessary, causing him to stumble backward. "Oops," Lawrence said with a smirk. "Didn't mean to scare you, kid." Jamal stepped forward, his voice firm. "He's just a kid. Leave him alone." Lawrence's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold glare. "Watch your tone, boy. You're on thin ice." The tension was palpable, the weight of unspoken threats hanging in the air. The boys stood frozen, caught between their instinct to protect one another and the knowledge of what defiance could cost them. "Let's go," Lawrence finally said, tossing the ball aside. "We'll be back if we hear about any trouble." The officers climbed back into their cruiser and drove off, leaving the group in uneasy silence. Malik clung to Tyler, his earlier joy replaced by fear. Jamal picked up the ball, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped it. "They'll be back," he muttered, his voice heavy with frustration. "We have to be careful." The boys nodded solemnly, the weight of the encounter settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Their sanctuary had been violated, their sense of safety shattered. But even as fear gnawed at them, a spark of defiance burned brighter. This court was theirs, and no one was going to take it from them. As the night deepened, they resumed their practice, their movements sharper, their focus more intense. The game was no longer just about basketball. It was about standing their ground, proving their worth, and refusing to be silenced. They didn't know it yet, but this night would be the beginning of a battle far greater than any they had faced before. The following evening, the boys returned to the court, the memory of the officer's intrusion still fresh in their minds. The air carried a charged tension, but they pushed it aside, determined not to let fear dictate their lives. The rhythmic sound of the basketball hitting the asphalt seemed louder than usual, almost defiant. Jamal led the drills, his voice firm as he called out instructions. Tyler and Malik worked on their passing, Malik's movements more deliberate after his brother's patient coaching the night before. Deshaun practiced his layups, his tall frame gliding effortlessly toward the hoop, while Caleb and Marcus ran defensive plays. Despite the lingering unease, the game felt like a return to normalcy, or at least a grasp at it. But the reprieve didn't last long. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the court, the all-too-familiar sound of an engine broke the rhythm of their practice. The police cruiser rolled up again, its headlights cutting through the twilight like unwelcome spotlights. Jamal's heart sank, but he didn't let it show. He stopped dribbling and gestured for the others to do the same. The ball came to a halt, wobbling slightly before settling on the cracked asphalt. The court fell silent as the two officers stepped out of the car. Lawrence's expression was even harder than the night before, and Brady followed with a smug smirk. "I thought I told you boys to stay out of trouble," Lawrence said, his tone sharp and condescending. "We're just practicing," Jamal replied, his voice steady but firm. He met Lawrence's gaze, refusing to look away. "We're not bothering anyone." "That's so?" Lawrence's eyes scanned the court as if looking for evidence of wrongdoing. "Because to me, it looks like loitering, maybe even vandalism." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and infuriating. Tyler's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles whitening. Malik instinctively moved closer to his brother, his small hand gripping Tyler's arm. "There's no vandalism here," Tyler said, his voice low but tense. "We're just playing ball, that's all." Lawrence narrowed his eyes, stepping closer to Tyler. "Did I ask for your opinion, kid?" Tyler stiffened, but before he could respond, Jamal placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent signal to let it go. He turned back to Lawrence, trying to defuse the situation. "We're just kids trying to play," Jamal said. "We're not causing any trouble." Brady chuckled, shaking his head. "Kids like you are always causing trouble. You just don't get caught every time." The boys exchanged uneasy glances. Deshaun shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his usual confidence faltering. Marcus glanced at the chain-link fence as if considering an escape route. But Jamal stood his ground, his jaw tightening. "Can we just get back to our game?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lawrence didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached down and picked up the basketball lying at his feet. He turned it over in his hands, examining it as if it held some incriminating evidence. Then, with a sudden and deliberate motion, he threw it at Malik. The ball struck Malik's chest harder than necessary, causing the boy to stumble backward. Tyler caught him before he could fall, his protective instincts kicking in. "Hey!" Tyler snapped, his voice louder than he intended. "What's your problem?" Lawrence's expression darkened. He took a step closer to Tyler, his hand hovering near his holster. "Watch your mouth, boy. You're already on thin ice." Jamal stepped between them, his hands raised slightly in a placating gesture. "We don't want any trouble," he said. "We're just trying to play. That's all." "Trouble?" Lawrence repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'll show you trouble." Before anyone could react, Lawrence grabbed Jamal by the arm, twisting it behind his back and shoving him against the fence. The sound of the chain-link rattling echoed across the court, a metallic cry that froze everyone in place. "Hey, let him go!" Deshaun shouted, stepping forward. Brady pulled out his baton, swinging it threateningly. "Back off, or you'll be next." The court erupted into chaos. Tyler reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling to unlock it as he tried to record what was happening. Jamal struggled against Lawrence's grip, his voice strained as he protested his innocence. Malik stood frozen, tears welling in his wide eyes as he clung to Tyler's shirt. Lawrence began shouting orders, his voice harsh and commanding. "On the ground! All of you, on the ground now!" When the boys hesitated, Brady lunged forward, shoving Deshaun to his knees. One by one, the boys complied, their faces pressed against the asphalt as their hands were wrenched behind their backs. Even Malik wasn't spared, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his small wrists. Tyler managed to hit send on his phone just before it was snatched away by Brady. The device hit the ground with a dull thud, its screen cracking on impact. Brady picked it up and pocketed it, a smug look on his face. The officers began calling for backup, their radios crackling with static as they reported the disturbance. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived, and the boys were hauled to their feet, their protests ignored. As they were loaded into the back of the police cars, Jamal caught Malik's terrified gaze. He forced himself to smile, trying to offer some semblance of reassurance. "It's gonna be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The cruisers pulled away, leaving the empty court behind. The sound of the bouncing basketball had long since ceased, replaced by the low hum of engines and the distant wail of sirens. For the boys, the ride to the station was silent, each of them grappling with a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. Their sanctuary had been violated, their freedom stolen in an instant. But even in the darkness of the police van, a spark of resistance remained. They were more than what these officers thought of them. And somehow they would prove it. The next day, the sun rose over the neighborhood as it always did, but something felt different. There was a tension, a palpable sense of anger and disbelief that radiated from the families of Jamal, Tyler, Malik, Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus. The parents had gathered early in the morning. Their worry turned into determination as they worked to get their children released. Long hours were spent making calls, speaking to lawyers, and demanding answers from the police. It was clear from the start that this wasn't just about their boys. It was about every kid in the neighborhood who faced injustice simply because of who they were. As the parents fought for their children's freedom, another battle was taking shape online. The video that Tyler had managed to send before his phone was confiscated had found its way to social media. Malik's friend, who had received the clip, uploaded it to every platform he could think of. The footage was grainy, the sound crackling in places, but the image was unmistakable. Uniformed officers roughly arresting a group of unarmed boys on a rundown basketball court. The look of fear on Malik's face as he was handcuffed was enough to spark a firestorm of outrage. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Comments flooded in, a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. People shared their own stories of police overreach, of how their communities had been mistreated, marginalized, and ignored. The hashtag #JusticeForTheBoys began trending, and the neighborhood that had often felt forgotten was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. The boys' parents didn't waste any time. They reached out to local activists, community leaders, and anyone who would listen. By midday, they had organized a press conference in front of the police station, demanding the immediate release of their children and an investigation into the officers involved. Jamal's mother, Denise, stood at the front of the crowd, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "Our children are not criminals," she said, her eyes fierce as she faced the gathered cameras. "They were playing basketball. They were doing something positive, something they love, and yet they were treated like they were dangerous, like they didn't belong. We demand justice. Not just for our boys, but for every child who's ever been treated like they're less than human because of where they live or the color of their skin." The crowd cheered in agreement, their voices rising in a chorus of support. Signs were held high, demanding accountability, equality, and an end to the systemic bias that had plagued their community for too long. The scene was chaotic but powerful, a testament to the strength that could be found in unity. The media, drawn by the viral video, descended on the scene. Reporters asked questions, cameras clicked, and the story began to spread beyond the confines of the neighborhood. It was picked up by local news, then national outlets. The image of Denise standing with her head held high, flanked by the other parents, became a symbol of resilience. This was no longer just a neighborhood issue. It was a national conversation about police brutality, racism, and the right of every child to feel safe. Inside the station, the boys sat together in a holding cell. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the air was thick with tension. Jamal sat with his back against the wall, his arm around Malik, who leaned into his brother's side, his small body still trembling. Tyler was pacing back and forth, his eyes darting to the barred window, while Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus sat silently, their faces a mix of fear and anger. "Do you think they're gonna let us go?" Malik whispered, his voice barely audible. Jamal tightened his grip on his brother, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, kid, they will. We just have to hang in there a little longer." Tyler stopped pacing and looked at Jamal. "They can't keep us here for nothing, right? We didn't do anything wrong." "They don't care about that," Deshaun muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "They just see us as trouble. Doesn't matter what we were doing." The words hung in the air, a bitter truth that they all knew but rarely spoke aloud. This wasn't about what they had done. It was about who they were, where they were from, and how the world saw them. Jamal looked at his friends, at their bowed heads and clenched fists, and something inside him hardened. They had been humiliated, treated like criminals for simply existing, but they weren't going to let this break them. Hours passed and the boys waited, the uncertainty gnawing at their resolve. Finally, there was a commotion outside the cell, the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps. The door opened, and a young woman in a suit stepped in, her expression a mix of determination and sympathy. "I'm Julia Martinez," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm your attorney. Your parents and the community are outside fighting for you. We're going to get you out of here." The boys exchanged hopeful glances, a flicker of relief passing through the group. Julia turned to the officers standing by the door. "These boys have been held without cause. I expect their release immediately, or I'll be filing formal charges against this department." The officers hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. The pressure from the media and the community outside was clearly having an effect. After a tense moment, one of them nodded, and the boys were led out of the cell. As they stepped into the lobby of the station, they were greeted by the sight of their parents and community members, their faces lighting up with relief at the sight of their children. Denise rushed forward, pulling Jamal and Malik into a tight embrace, her tears finally spilling over. Tyler's mother wrapped her arms around both her sons, her hands trembling as she held them close. The press conference was still in full swing outside, the crowd cheering as the boys emerged from the station. They were free, but the fight was far from over. As they stood on the steps, the boys looked out at the sea of faces. Neighbors, friends, strangers who had come to support them. It was overwhelming, the sense of solidarity and strength that seemed to radiate from the crowd. Jamal took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a sign that read, "We stand with our boys." He looked down at Malik, who was still clutching his hand, and then at Tyler and the others. They were battered, shaken, but they were not broken. They had each other, and they had a community that refused to stay silent. As the boys stepped forward, they were met with applause, the kind of support they had never expected but desperately needed. The cameras clicked, capturing the moment. 6 young boys standing side by side, their chins held high as they faced the crowd. They weren't just playing basketball anymore. They were fighting for their right to exist, to dream, and to be seen as more than the stereotypes that had been thrust upon them. The next few days were a blur of interviews, meetings, and media appearances. Julia worked tirelessly, not only to ensure that the charges against the boys were dropped, but to push for an investigation into the officers involved. The video continued to spread, drawing attention from civil rights organizations and advocacy groups across the country. People who had never heard of their neighborhood were now watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The boys were grateful for the support, but the experience had left scars. Malik, who had once been full of laughter and energy, was quieter now, his eyes haunted by the memory of being thrown to the ground, handcuffed like a criminal. Tyler had become more protective of his younger brother, always keeping him close, his eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. Jamal, who had always been the rock for his friends, found himself struggling with anger at the system, at the officers who had treated them like less than human, and at the world that seemed determined to keep them down. But even in the face of all that had happened, there was a sense of hope. The community had rallied around them, refusing to let the incident fade into the background. They were planning marches, organizing meetings, demanding that the city take action. They were fighting not just for the boys, but for every child who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And for the boys, the fight wasn't over. They knew they couldn't let this define them. They had dreams of playing in the school league, of making something of themselves, of proving that they were more than the labels society placed on them. They were determined to get back on that court, to pick up the ball and play again, not just for themselves, but for every kid who looked up to them, who saw in them the possibility of something greater. They weren't just 6 boys from a rundown neighborhood anymore. They were a symbol, a rallying cry for justice, for equality, for the right to dream. And as they stood together, surrounded by their families and friends, they knew that they were ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, the story of the boys' wrongful arrest continued to spread. It was on every local news channel, discussed on talk shows, and shared across social media. The injustice of it resonated with people far beyond the neighborhood. It wasn't just about these 6 boys, it was about every marginalized community that had ever been targeted, about every young person whose dreams were stifled by systemic barriers. Among those watching the story unfold was a man named Derek Harris. He sat in his bright, spacious living room, staring at his television as the news played. Images of the boys, Jamal, Tyler, Malik, Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus, flashed on the screen, their faces a mixture of fear, defiance, and hope. Derek felt a pang in his chest, a familiar ache that took him back to his own childhood. Derek had grown up just a few blocks away from where the boys lived now. He knew that neighborhood like the back of his hand, knew the feeling of the cracked pavement under his sneakers, the distant hum of traffic mixed with the laughter of children playing outside. He knew what it was like to have dreams in a place that seemed determined to keep you from reaching them. Back then, basketball had been his salvation. It was what kept him off the streets, what gave him a purpose when it felt like there was nothing else. He had been good enough to earn a scholarship, good enough to make it to college and eventually to the pros. Now, retired from professional basketball, He was a successful entrepreneur, running a chain of sporting goods stores. But he had never forgotten where he came from, and watching those boys on the screen, he saw himself in them. He couldn't just sit back and watch. He had to do something. The next morning, Derek drove to the neighborhood. It had been years since he had been back, but the sights and sounds were as familiar as ever. He parked his car near the old basketball court, the same one he used to play on as a kid. It hadn't changed much, still worn, still surrounded by a chain-link fence, still the heart of the neighborhood. As he approached, he saw the boys there. They were gathered around the court, the ball line forgotten on the ground as they talked in low voices. Jamal was the first to notice him, his eyes narrowing in confusion as Derek approached. "Hey there," Derek said, his voice warm, his smile easy. "You boys mind if I join you for a minute?" The boys exchanged glances, uncertain. Tyler stepped forward, his posture guarded. "Who are you?" "My name's Derek Harris," he said, extending a hand. "I used to play ball around here a long time ago. I saw what happened to you guys on the news, and I wanted to come by and see how you're holding up." Jamal studied him for a moment, then shook his hand, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Wait, you're Derek Harris? You played for the Suns, right?" Derek nodded, his smile growing. "That's right. I played for a few teams, but Phoenix was my home for a while." The boy's skepticism seemed to fade, replaced by curiosity. Malik, who had been standing a little behind the others, stepped forward, his eyes wide. "You're really Derek Harris? My brother's got your poster in his room." Derek chuckled, ruffling Malik's hair. "That's me. But I'm not here to talk about my career. I'm here because I know what it's like to grow up here, to fight for a place on this court. I know what it's like to have a dream that feels like it's just out of reach." Jamal's expression softened, a mixture of respect and hope flickering in his eyes. "We just want to play ball, man. We're not trying to cause trouble." Derek nodded, his face growing serious. "I know, and that's why I'm here. I want to help you boys get back on your feet. You've got a lot of people standing behind you, people who want to see you succeed. But you need more than just words. You need a place to train, equipment, and support." The boys listened, their expressions shifting from guarded skepticism to cautious optimism. Derek could see the spark of hope in their eyes, a spark that he knew could become a fire with the right kind of support. "There's an old building not too far from here," Derek continued. "It used to be a gym, but it's been abandoned for years. I've talked to the owner, and he's willing to let us use it. It needs some work, but I've got the resources to make it happen. If you're willing to put in the effort, I'm willing to help you turn it into a proper training facility." Jamal exchanged a look with Tyler, his eyes wide. "You mean like our own gym?" Derek nodded. "Exactly. Your own place where you can practice without anyone bothering you. A real court with real equipment. But it's going to take some work. We'll need to clean it up, fix it up, make it ours. What do you say?" The boys were silent for a moment, the weight of Derek's offer settling over them. Malik looked up at his brother, his eyes shining. "We can do it, right, Jamal?" Jamal smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He turned back to Derek and nodded. "We're in, whatever it takes." Derek's smile widened. "That's what I like to hear. Now, let's get to work." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Derek rallied the community, organizing volunteers to help clean out the old building. The place was a mess, dusty with broken windows and peeling paint, but it had potential. The boys were there every day, scrubbing floors, painting walls, hauling away debris. They worked side by side with their parents, their neighbors, and even strangers who had heard their story and wanted to help. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a sense that they were building something meaningful, not just a gym, but a symbol of what they could achieve together. Derek brought in equipment, everything from basketballs and nets to weightlifting gear. He used his connections to get them a deal on new uniforms, each one emblazoned with their new team name, Equalizers. The name was Jamal's idea, a statement of who they were and what they stood for. The transformation of the old building was remarkable. Where once there had been a dusty, abandoned space, now stood a bright, welcoming gym. The walls were painted in bold colors, inspirational quotes lined the hallways, and the new basketball court gleamed under the overhead lights. It was more than just a place to play. It was a place to belong. On the day of the grand opening, the entire neighborhood came out to celebrate. Music played, people brought food, and the air was filled with laughter and excitement. Derek stood by the entrance watching as the boys ran onto the court, their faces lit up with joy. He felt a swell of pride in these boys, in what they had accomplished, and in what they would continue to achieve. Jamal walked over to Derek, a basketball tucked under his arm. He looked around the gym, his eyes filled with awe. "We couldn't have done this without you, man. Thank you." Derek shook his head, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You did this, all of you. I just gave you a push. Now it's up to you to keep going, to keep fighting for what you want." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "We will. We're not stopping here." Derek smiled, his eyes shining. "That's what I like to hear. Now, how about we see what you boys can do on this new court?" The boys gathered at center court, their new uniforms bright against the polished wood. Jamal bounced the ball a few times, then looked at his teammates. Tyler, Malik, Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus, all of them stood ready, their eyes filled with determination. "We're the Equalizers," Jamal said, his voice steady. "We play for ourselves, for each other, and for everyone who's ever been told they couldn't. Let's show them what we're made of." With that, Jamal passed the ball to Tyler, and the game began. The boys moved across the court with a new sense of purpose, their movements fluid and confident. Malik, who had once hesitated, now dribbled with skill and precision, his eyes focused on the hoop. Deshaun and Caleb worked together, their defense tight and unyielding. Marcus took a shot, the ball arcing perfectly through the air before swishing through the net. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound echoing off the walls of the gym. Derek watched from the sidelines, a smile on his face. He knew this was just the beginning for these boys. They had faced obstacles, they had been knocked down, but they had gotten back up. And now they had a place to call their own, a place where they could dream and grow and thrive. The Equalizers were ready to take on whatever came next, and Derek knew they would do it together, with strength, with resilience, and with the unwavering belief that they were capable of greatness. The new gym became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a place where laughter, shouts, and the constant rhythm of bouncing basketballs filled the air. Every day after school, the boys gathered at their gym, ready to work, to sweat, and to prove that they were worthy of everything they'd fought for. But with the hope that filled those brightly painted walls came new challenges, and the boys quickly learned that this new beginning wasn't without its struggles. Jamal was the first to feel the pressure. As the leader of the group, he had always carried a sense of responsibility for his friends. It was his job to make sure they stayed on track, that they didn't get caught up in the wrong crowd, that they gave it their all every time they stepped onto the court. But now, with the spotlight on them, The weight on his shoulders seemed to grow heavier. He was no longer just playing for himself or for his friends. He was playing for everyone who had supported them, everyone who looked to the Equalizers as a symbol of hope. During practice, Jamal pushed the others harder than he ever had before. He called out plays, corrected mistakes, and demanded more. His voice was sharp, his patience thin. The others noticed the change, but they tried to roll with it, understanding that the stakes were higher now. Tyler, however, wasn't having it. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice, Tyler tossed the ball aside, his frustration bubbling over. "Man, what's your problem, Jamal? You've been on our case all week." Jamal glared at him, his jaw tightening. My problem is that we're not working hard enough. We've got people watching us now, Tyler. We can't afford to slack off." "We're not slacking off," Tyler shot back. "We're doing our best, but you're acting like we're in some kind of military camp." The other boys watched in silence, the tension between Jamal and Tyler palpable. Malik, who had been practicing his dribbling, stopped, his eyes darting nervously between his brother and Jamal. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to keep his anger in check. "I'm just trying to make sure we're ready. We can't let people down." Tyler shook his head, his voice softening. "We're not gonna let anyone down, Jamal, but we're a team. You can't do this alone, and you can't push us like this. We're in this together." Jamal looked at his friend, the words sinking in. He knew Tyler was right. He had been trying to shoulder everything himself, afraid of failure, afraid of letting down the people who had believed in them. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, man. I don't want to mess this up." Tyler stepped forward, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "We won't. But we've got to trust each other, all right? We're not just teammates, we're brothers." Jamal nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, brothers." The tension eased and the other boys relaxed, smiles spreading across their faces. Malik stepped forward, a hopeful look in his eyes. "So, does this mean we're done for today? Because I'm starving." Laughter rippled through the group, the moment of conflict giving way to the easy camaraderie that had always defined them. They grabbed their things, heading out of the gym and into the cool evening air. Jamal felt a sense of relief, the weight on his shoulders a little lighter now that he had his brothers beside him. But the challenges weren't just on the court. Off the court, Malik struggled with the lingering fear that had taken root after their arrest. He tried to hide it, to put on a brave face, but there were moments when the memories came flooding back. The feeling of the officer's hands on his shoulders, the cold metal of the handcuffs around his wrists, the sound of Jamal's voice as he tried to calm him. It was enough to make his hands shake, enough to make him hesitate before stepping onto the court. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Malik stayed behind after practice. He lingered near the edge of the court, watching as the others packed up. Jamal noticed his brother's hesitation and walked over, kneeling beside him. "Hey, you okay?" Jamal asked, his voice gentle. Malik looked down, kicking at the ground with the toe of his sneaker. I don't know if I'm good enough, Jamal. I don't want to mess things up for everyone." Jamal's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his brother's voice. He wrapped an arm around Malik's shoulders, pulling him close. "Listen to me, Malik. You belong here. You're part of this team, and we need you. Don't let what happened make you think you're not good enough. You're stronger than you know." Malik looked up at his brother, tears brimming in his eyes. "But what if I'm not?" Jamal smiled, ruffling Malik's hair. "You are. And I'm going to be right here, every step of the way. We all are." Malik nodded, a small smile breaking through his fear. "Okay, I'll try." Jamal pulled him into a hug, holding him close. "That's all I need, kid. Just keep trying." As the days turned into weeks, the boys continued to work, facing each new challenge head on. There were moments of doubt, moments when the pressure seemed too much, but they had each other to lean on, and that made all the difference. Derek was there every step of the way, offering guidance, encouragement, and sometimes just a shoulder to lean on. He watched with pride as the boys grew, not just as players, but as young men who were learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. One afternoon, Derek called the boys together for a meeting. They gathered in the gym, sitting on the bleachers as Derek stood before them, his expression serious but hopeful. "I know you've all been working hard," he said, his voice carrying through the gym, "and I know it hasn't been easy. But I want you to know that I'm proud of each and every one of you. You've taken something that was meant to break you, and you've used it to build something incredible." The boys listened, their eyes fixed on Derek as he spoke. Malik sat beside Jamal, his brother's arm draped protectively over his shoulders. "But there's something else I want to talk to you about," Derek continued. "We've been invited to play an exhibition game against one of the top teams in the city." The boys exchanged excited glances, a murmur of disbelief running through the group. Jamal's eyes widened, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you serious?" Derek smiled, nodding. "I'm serious. They saw the story about you guys, and they want to give you a chance to show what you've got. It's going to be tough. They're good, and they've got way more experience. But I know you're ready for this." Tyler grinned, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "We're going to take them down." Jamal laughed, his heart swelling with pride and determination. This was their chance, an opportunity to prove not just to the city, but to themselves that they belonged. They had fought for this, worked for this, and now they were ready to show the world what they were made of. As they stood up, ready to get back to practice, Jamal looked around at his teammates, his brothers. Malik, Tyler, Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus. They were different from the boys who had stood on that old run-down court weeks ago. They were stronger, more confident, united by a shared purpose. They were the Equalizers, and they were ready for whatever came next. The boys practiced harder than ever in the following days, their movements sharp and precise, their focus unwavering. They worked together, pushing each other to be better, to be stronger. Jamal no longer felt the need to carry the weight alone. He knew he had a team beside him, a team that was just as committed, just as driven. Malik, too, began to find his confidence. He moved across the court with a newfound sense of purpose, his dribbling more controlled, his passes crisp. He no longer hesitated, no longer doubted his place on the team. He had his brother's words in his heart, and he knew he was stronger than his fears. The day of the exhibition game arrived, and the boys stood together in their uniforms, the name Equalizers emblazoned across their chests. The gym was filled with people, neighbors, friends, supporters who had come to cheer them on. Derek stood on the sidelines, his eyes filled with pride as he watched his team. Jamal looked at his teammates, his heart swelling with emotion. They had come so far, faced so much, and now they were ready to show what they were made of. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with each of his friends in turn. "All right, boys," he said, his voice steady and strong. "We've worked for this. We've earned this. Let's get out there and show them who we are." The boys nodded, their eyes shining with determination. They stepped onto the court, their hearts pounding in their chests. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound echoing off the gym walls, and Jamal felt a surge of energy. This was their moment. This was what they had worked for, what they had dreamed of. As the whistle blew and the game began, the boys moved as one, their bodies in sync, their minds focused. Jamal dribbled down the court, his eyes scanning the defense. He passed to Tyler, who moved with precision, dodging a defender before tossing the ball to Malik. Malik caught it, his eyes locked on the hoop, his heart pounding. He took the shot, the ball soaring through the air. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing down to that single moment. The ball arced perfectly, swishing through the net, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Malik's face lit up, a smile breaking across his face as his teammates rushed over to him, cheering and clapping him on the back. Jamal pulled him into a hug, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Malik. You're a part of this team, and you belong here." Malik nodded, his smile widening. "Yeah, I do." As the game continued, the boys played with everything they had. They didn't win, the opposing team was more experienced, more polished, but they held their own, fighting for every point, every rebound, every loose ball. They left everything on the court, and when the final buzzer sounded, they knew they had given it their all. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding the Equalizers, their cheers filling the gym. Derek walked over, his smile wide as he clapped Jamal on the back. "You boys did good. You showed them what you're made of." Jamal looked around at his teammates, at the smiles on their faces, the pride in their eyes. They hadn't won the game, but they had won something more important: respect, both from others and from themselves. They had faced their fears, overcome their doubts, and proved that they were more than the labels that had been thrust upon them. They were fighters, they were brothers, and they were a team. The Equalizers were just getting started. The day of the first official school league match was fast approaching, and the energy in the neighborhood was electric. The Equalizers had transformed from a ragtag group of kids playing on a worn-out court into a team with purpose, with discipline, and, most importantly, with heart. They had faced the worst: arrest, humiliation, the weight of expectations, and had come out stronger on the other side. The gym had become a second home, not only for the boys, but for the entire community. Parents brought food and helped clean, local teenagers gathered to watch practices, and younger kids looked up to the team with a mix of admiration and hope. For a neighborhood that had often felt forgotten, the gym and the Equalizers had become symbols of what could be achieved with determination and unity. On the morning of the match, Jamal stood in front of the mirror in his small room, adjusting his uniform. His mother, Denise, stood in the doorway, watching him with pride. Her eyes misted as she took in the sight of her son, tall, confident, ready to lead his team. "You look good, Jamal," she said, her voice soft. Jamal smiled, turning to face her. "Thanks, Mom. We're ready for this. We've been working so hard." Denise nodded, stepping forward to straighten the collar of his uniform. "I know you are. I've seen how much effort you've put in. No matter what happens today, I want you to remember that you've already won. You've shown everyone who you really are. Strong, determined, and kind. I'm so proud of you." Jamal swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." She pulled him into a hug, holding him close. "Now go out there and show them what you're made of." When Jamal arrived at the gym, the rest of the team was already there, their faces a mixture of excitement and nerves. Malik bounced on his toes, unable to stand still, his eyes wide with anticipation. Tyler, as usual, was focused, his mind already strategizing for the game. Deshaun, Caleb, and Marcus stood together, their eyes scanning the gym as they took in the growing crowd. Derek was waiting for them on the sidelines, his arms crossed over his chest, a proud smile on his face. "All right, boys," he said as they gathered around. "This is it, the first official game of the season. You've all worked hard, and I know you're ready for this. Remember what we've talked about. It's not just about winning. It's about showing who we are, showing that we belong here." The boys nodded, their eyes shining with determination. Jamal looked around at his teammates, his brothers, and felt a swell of emotion. They had come so far, faced so much, and now they were standing here, ready to prove themselves. The opposing team arrived shortly after, a well-known, established team from one of the better-funded schools in the city. They had new uniforms, branded sneakers, and an aura of confidence that spoke of their experience. They looked at the Equalizers with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, clearly not expecting much from a team that had only recently come together. But the Equalizers weren't intimidated. They knew they had something the other team didn't, a hunger to prove themselves, a bond forged in the fires of adversity, and a community that believed in them. The crowd filled the gym, the sound of cheering and clapping echoing off the walls. Parents, neighbors, friends, all of them had come to support the boys. Signs were held high, bearing the words, "Go Equalizers," and "We believe in you." The energy was infectious, and the boys felt it as they took to the court for warm-ups. Malik's eyes scanned the stands until they landed on his mother, who was waving and cheering. He waved back, a wide smile spreading across his face. This was what he had dreamed of. Not just playing basketball, but doing it in front of the people who mattered most to him. As the referee blew the whistle to signal the start of the game, Jamal took his position at center court for the tip-off. He glanced at his teammates, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the determination in their eyes, the fire that burned within them. This wasn't just about basketball. It was about standing up for themselves, for their community, for their right to dream. The whistle blew, and the game began. The opposing team quickly took possession of the ball, their movements sharp and precise. They were skilled, their passes seamless, and within moments they scored the first basket. The crowd erupted in cheers, but the Equalizers weren't fazed. They knew this wasn't going to be easy. Jamal called for the ball, his eyes scanning the court as he dribbled down the lane. He saw Tyler break free of his defender and pass to him. Tyler caught the ball, pivoted, and shot, the ball arcing through the air before sinking through the hoop. The crowd roared, and the Equalizers felt a surge of energy. This was their game, too. The first half was intense, the two teams going back and forth, trading baskets and playing tight defense. The opposing team was faster, more polished, but the Equalizers had heart. They fought for every loose ball, every rebound, every opportunity. Malik, despite his smaller size, played with ferocity, stealing the ball from an opposing player and making a fast break to the hoop. He scored, and the crowd went wild. At halftime, the Equalizers gathered in the locker room, their faces flushed, their bodies covered in sweat. Derek stood before them, his eyes filled with pride. "You're doing great out there," he said. "They might have more experience, but you've got something they don't: each other. Keep playing your game. Trust each other. Fight for every point, and leave it all on the court." Jamal looked around at his teammates, his heart swelling with pride. "We've got this," he said, his voice steady. "We're not just playing for us, we're playing for everyone who believed in us. Let's go out there and show them what the Equalizers are made of." The boys nodded, their eyes shining with determination. They stood up, their hands coming together in the center, their voices ringing out in unison. "Equalizers on 3. 1, 2, 3. Equalizers." The second half was even more intense than the first. The opposing team stepped up their game, their defense tightening, their offense relentless. But the Equalizers fought back, matching them point for point. Deshaun and Caleb worked together to shut down their opponents, their defense like a wall. Marcus, who had struggled with confidence early in the season, made 2 crucial three-pointers, his face lighting up as the crowd erupted in cheers. With only a minute left on the clock, the game was tied. The gym was filled with tension, the crowd on their feet, the air thick with anticipation. Jamal dribbled the ball, his eyes scanning the court. He saw Tyler break free and pass to him. Tyler caught the ball, but the defense closed in on him, forcing him to pass to Malik. Malik caught the ball, his eyes locking on the hoop. He could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure, the expectations, the hope of everyone watching. For a split second, he hesitated, the memory of the arrest, the fear, threatening to overwhelm him. But then he heard Jamal's voice, clear and steady. "You've got this, Malik. Take the shot." Malik took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the hoop. He dribbled once, twice, then jumped, releasing the ball. Time seemed to slow as the ball soared through the air, the gym falling silent, everyone holding their breath. The ball arced perfectly, spinning as it approached the hoop. It hit the backboard, then dropped through the net. The gym erupted in cheers, the sound deafening as the crowd leapt to their feet. Malik's face lit up, a smile breaking across his face as his teammates rushed over to him, lifting him into the air. Jamal pulled Malik into a hug, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Malik. You did it." Malik grinned, his heart swelling with joy. "We did it." The final whistle blew, and the Equalizers had won. The crowd stormed the court, parents, friends, neighbors all surrounding the boys, cheering and hugging them. Derek watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride as he saw the boys celebrate. They had faced so much: fear, doubt, injustice, and they had overcome it all. As the crowd began to clear, Jamal looked around at his teammates, at the smiles on their faces, the joy in their eyes. They had done it. Not just won the game, but proven that they belonged, that they were more than the labels that had been thrust upon them. They had faced their fears, overcome their doubts, and shown the world who they really were. They were fighters, they were brothers, and they were a team. Standing at the center of the court, Jamal raised his hand, and the rest of the team gathered around, their hands coming together once more. "Equalizers on 3, he said, his voice steady, filled with emotion. 1, 2, 3, Equalizers." Their voices echoed through the gym, a testament to their strength, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in each other. The Equalizers were more than a team. They were a family, and this was only the beginning of their journey. They knew there would be more challenges, more obstacles, but they were ready to face them together. As they left the gym that night, their heads held high, they knew that they were capable of greatness. They had fought for their place, and they had earned it. And no one could ever take that away from them. They were the Equalizers, and they were ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories. Watch our other videos, there's a lot more to come. Share this video with your friends to be inspired and discuss important topics together. See you soon.